Hey, I'm Alan Hutchison. I'm with the Liver Fellow Network, and thank you for joining us for how to give a presentation. We have presentations today from Drs. Ayala and Dr. Khalid. We'll have them introduce themselves as they do their presentation. We'll have some time for questions and other comments at the end. Go ahead, Dr. Khalid.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Bilal Khalid. So I'm a transplant hepatology fellow at Mayo Clinic, Rochester. So I'll be presenting on Liver and Learn, a serious poster. So it's how to give a poster presentation. I don't have any financial disclosure, sadly. And the only reason I'm giving this presentation is because I've given a lot of poster presentations and I'm hoping to share some wisdom and some advice. So, a rough outline. Since primarily most of you are looking for advice and will be presenting at ACG and AASLD, I think it will be a good idea to just go through poster requirements for both of them. I think it's always good to get nuts and bolts out of the way. We'll talk about some poster resources designing. A lot of the times when we're thinking of a poster presentation, we're thinking of the actual poster, but really the meat of it is actually preparing for the poster. So we'll spend a lot of time thinking about how to come up with a poster, what is the design process, and then before you even think of making a poster, thinking of the motivation of the audience, where they're coming from, and what kind of learners you're going to have at the meeting. And then having an elevator pitch and asking if your learners have any questions. And finally, last but not the least, networking. So let's go through ACG, which is coming up just this month. Deadline is October 11. Most of you probably have already submitted everything and are ready for it. But in case you're procrastinators like me, so it's coming up. E-poster is required in addition to a printed poster. And that's important because a lot of conferences nowadays are moving towards you having a narration for the poster. So that is the part I'm not going to go into too much detail about. It's relatively new. ACG is pretty strict about requiring it. I actually read about their guidelines. If you don't update or upload your narration for the e-poster, they will, I think they will revoke your poster and they will not let you present. So it used to be optional before, but it's not anymore. There is a maximum poster length, poster size and width. So I have that here. They also have a recommended poster size. And it seems like both ACG and AASLD are contracting with Geni Graphics. I have the link here, but you can, I'm sure you have literature from both ACG and AASLD on where to print your poster. They also have free poster templates available at these links right here. Speaking of AASLD, which is a little bit later, but their deadline is not too far away. It's also this month. So it's going to be October 27th, so you have a little bit more time. They have more of the requirements are about their minimum font and the types of recommended fonts. They will obviously give you PowerPoint templates as well for you to make your poster. And they actually have a minimum size rather than a maximum size. So it's important before you think of making a poster, you will be getting literature from your respective conferences, your respective societies to really adhere to those guidelines, because these are low-hanging fruit and gimmies that you don't want to miss. But it's nice that they have a website for you to actually send your poster. And I think they also have a way for you to get your poster delivered on the day you go there. So depending on how you want to work logistics, it's nice to have that option and to know what resources you have available. Now, I briefly touched upon this before creating a poster. Think about the nuts and bolts, and this is what I'm going to spend about 20–30% of this talk about. So think of the funding, right? We're all trainees. You don't want to be paying for a poster. Really ask that question. It will be very important to talk to the right people. So your mentor should be paying for your poster. Hopefully you have a good mentor who can help you with that. If they don't have funding or you don't have anyone who can help you, talk to your institution. At my GI fellowship, our institution was able to print posters for free, but you had to think about it ahead of time because closer to conference deadlines, a lot of people would sign up for that and you wouldn't be able to get those slots. But if it's free and it's available, planning ahead of time really does play dividends. And some institutions have a medical arts department for illustrations, but these are also really nice, especially if your institution does it for free. Then you can get really nice professional pictures for ideas you have for your poster, and you can even use these for your manuscripts in the future, which is nice. There are a lot of free online resources, and I'm a big fan of free online resources. The Noun Project, I really, really like their website. It's something that as long as you give them an attribution that it's from the Noun Project, you can actually use their icons. And I'll show you an example in the next slide. Microsoft PowerPoint has a ton of icons that are free to use. So these little, black and white icons, I like using them. They're free from Microsoft PowerPoint. They kind of are a nice way you can search on PowerPoint and use them to illustrate your points. And they're often not in color, which is great because if you can get your point across with black and white, then it's better than color. And we'll talk about why that's important. And BioRender, I believe there's a free trial version. There is a paid version for it also, but it's a nice way to use existing resources. A lot of people have uploaded their templates, and especially for a poster presentation where the bar for having really original illustrations are lower, as long as you give attribution, I think BioRender is also a good option. Again, not to belabor the point, please be mindful of deadlines. Conferences won't understand last minute things. So they have the deadlines posted for a reason. You don't want to miss a deadline, especially after you've done 90% of the work getting your poster accepted and printing earlier. So plan ahead of time for that. This is the Noun Project. I just looked up the liver and I'm not sure why it's picking up the kidneys, but you can see they're nice templates and it's very easy to use. Something you can also use for your PowerPoint presentations. Now, designing a poster. Think of different learning styles. Everyone has different learning styles. So, typically we think of visual, auditory, reading and writing, kinesthetic. It's based on how people perceive learning, using hands to learn as well. Typically, when you're thinking of a poster, most people are visual and auditory learners. So you have to optimize for that. So it's not just what you see when it comes to a poster, it's also how people hear. So you have to optimize how your poster looks, but you also have to practice how you convey your points. So that's super, super important as well. And that's why it's more than the 3-minute narration that ACG and other conferences talk about. It's how you are present at your poster and communicate your point, which requires a lot of practice. And, I think that's something a lot of people miss. So in my experience, I think practicing, talking about your poster in different settings is important as well. Now, I know I talked about different learnings as separate silos, but that's not really true, right? Like learning is actually like Venn diagrams. So people can have different types of learning philosophies and overlapping that as well. It's really hard to tailor it to different learners, but just being aware of that helps you think how you want to create your poster. So another important way to think about it is the reason this is important is visual abstracts are becoming more and more important over written abstracts in journals, and it's becoming more of a requirement. And just think of liver Twitter tutorials on X/Twitter as well. So really, you're surrounded by a plethora of different learning opportunities and how to teach your learners. So graphical, list-based, text, contextual, these are the 4 ways where you can maximize visual learning. So you have to think about these 4 points when you're thinking of a poster. How does your data come across? Like, is it primarily graphical? Is there a way you can mix and match? Typically, it's a good way that you can mix and match because that adds some variety to your poster. It looks more interesting. If you're having a whole text-heavy poster, or if it's primarily graphical, there's barely any text, it won't be interesting, and it will be really difficult for your learner to perceive. So you really want to make sure that you're maximizing learning of your learners and also using different formats in your poster. No, we talked about why black and white can be more important than color sometimes, and you'll tell me below, but a picture speaks 1,000 words. Yes, but it doesn't mean it has to be all color, right? So don't rely only on colors. And this is something, it took me many years in my training to realize there are so many people in the world that have color vision deficiency slash color blindedness. So 350 million people in the world, more common in men than women, but still playing the odds, there are going to be a decent amount of people at your conference who might have color vision deficiency. So if you look at colors with quote unquote normal vision, then this is how they will see your poster. So if your poster has these colors next to each other, and I'll give you some examples, then they're going to see this or this or this. And it doesn't help if you're trying to differentiate between two different comparisons with colors when your learner only sees all green. So that being said, a rule of thumb typically is to avoid using red and green as contrasting colors. And a big point is a lot of graphical softwares will give you your colors in red and green as default. So you have to be very careful, right? Because this is what your learners are prototypically going to see. So you have to be careful in how you contrast colors. So GraphPad Prism, there is a mechanism of using shapes as differentiating data points than colors. So I've had to do that for manuscripts where instead of colors, to avoid paying extra charges when I can get my point across using shapes, I have had to use shapes. That being said, you learn something, right? So using shapes to get your point across is also important. And that way you minimize contrasting color issues for your learners with color vision deficiency. Similarly, symbols, patterns are an interesting way of showing your data as well. And when it comes to text, you don't have to use color necessarily to enhance your text. So you can use italics, boldface, underline. There are a plethora of ways to enhance your text that avoids relying only on colors. And this is a nice website, but if you Google, you're going to find a lot of resources. This is one of the good resources called davidmathlogic.com. So they show you different accessible color templates. So when you're making your poster, if you really want to get your point across primarily based on color, if that's how your data comes across, then try to change your colors that are accessible color plates, and your learners will thank you. Now, quick tips when it comes to designing a poster: readability. So make sure it's readable from 3 to 5 feet away. You really don't want something that's tiny, tiny font because a lot of the times you're going to have multiple people coming in to hear you speak, and they'll have to really get close to your poster to read what's going on. And people don't like that, right? Everybody likes distance and being able to read from afar. So 3 to 5 feet is the golden rule of thumb. Orientation. This always used to confuse me, horizontal or vertical. And that's why I talked about the font. I talked about, knowing the size of your conference. What size are you allowed? Most people like to print horizontal, and horizontal is nice because that's the most conventional way of doing it. That being said, I'll give you an example of one of my posters where I had to do a pseudo vertical poster. So you can tailor your data and your information based on orientation, right? So if it's vertical, something I haven't done so far, but from talking to people who are better than me at giving poster presentations, it's actually helpful to have important information at the top. So if you want to state your conclusion at the top, it's atypical, but no one says you can't do it, especially when most people start from the top to bottom when it comes to having a vertical poster. So you can have your important information at the top, and you can have your references or less important things at the bottom because people like going from top to bottom. So that's one way of doing it. That being said, horizontal is generally more conventional. So title, I always used to think I had to use a title that's exactly my poster research project. It's not true. It could be unique. It could be memorable. It could stand out. Just make sure it's professional. As long as it's professional and it's unique and memorable, people will clamor to your poster because they're like, oh, I want to see this poster that's talking about this topic. It's easy to remember as well, easy to find. You can do that. Another benefit of choosing a title that's different than your actual research project, you save your actual research title for your manuscript. Some journals have requirements where you need to have a unique title, and some conferences were actually published, I believe DDW does that. So they will actually publish your abstracts in DDW in the supplement. You don't want your title to be used up by your poster and it's published somewhere, and then you can't use it for your manuscript, especially if you work so hard to come up with that. So you can always change your title and come up with something unique, and that's fun to do. Now, kind of towards the end, I want to give you some examples, and I thought it was mean to find posters of other people, so I gave you two of my own posters. So feel free to critique them, and I'll critique them for you. The first one is a little, you know, very nice project. I poured my heart and soul into it, but as you can see, I probably poured too much of myself into it. So this was during COVID times in 2020, I believe, when I worked on this project. It's nice. It's very, very thorough, and let's break it down. So the good part is it's very thorough, and that's where I'll start about the good parts. So the bad part is very text heavy, right? So let me go back to it. You'll see a ton and ton of text, and I can promise you this is not the perfect way of reading your poster from 3 to 5 feet away. This is very small font, very hard to read, especially with the tables. Did I really need to put all 7 of my tables in there? No, I should have thought better, but early on, I was still learning 4 or 5 years ago about this. So I wanted to be very thorough, but it's too much. I ended up using all of these tables in my manuscript. So you don't have to use all the tables from your manuscript into your poster. You can pick and choose the most important ones, and you can save some for questions and talk about it. Oh, yes, we do have that table, and I can talk about it. And then color scheme is not optimal. Let's go back to it. So, the way the color scheme is set up, it's completely, the red for p-values. It just doesn't flow very well. So it's not the most optimal color scheme as well for this. This one, I think this is from this year. I'm a little more proud of this one. So this is the weird pseudo vertical poster that I told you about. And the reason it's pseudo vertical is because I got it printed for free from my institution. And they only let me print it with a very weird orientation. And this was the maximal I could print it with. And they said, if I do anything more than this, they will charge me. Well, they won't charge me. They won't be able to do it. So knowing what's possible and what's possible and allowed is important. So I just maximized my faith with the orientation I was allowed and didn't have to pay a dime for this, which is nice. What's nice about this is balanced tables and text. So I tried to go by a format that's not text heavy. I wanted to have some tables, but not too many. I created some of my own illustration, didn't rely primarily on color. And so I used Prism for this, and I tried to be color vision deficient friendly here. So I think all of that put together, it's a better poster. It's not the best one, but a better one than the previous one. So you want to have something that has a mix of pictures, have a mix of tables and graphs and, text and contextual learning, so different things. Obviously, every research project is different. So just be careful with that. The bad, I guess the graphs could have more real estate. So you can always critique your posters. You're always going to be your worst critic, but that's okay as long as you do your best. Now, practice, practice, practice. I can't belabor this point enough. Time yourself. So you will hear about this in the oral presentation part. So important. You can even FaceTime your friends about this. I presented to my mentor. I presented to my research group. I even took a video of myself presenting. It was very scary to watch myself present. And I know most people don't like hearing themselves talk and seeing themselves talk, but I promise you're going to find things. You will find things you can clarify. You'll avoid the ums that are invariable in any presentation, and you can fix it and you can rinse and repeat. Why is this important? You'll say, this is a poster presentation, because remember what we talked about. It's not only visual, it's auditory learning as well. So speaking and clarifying your speaking is so important. And anticipate questions and prep responses to that. Check your up-to-date literature, go to PubMed. Since you're presented your poster, I promise you someone has published something new, and that one person who presented a new post, published something new, will come and invariably find you and be like, did you take into account my research project? And I'll be like, oh my God, I should have thought about this. So it's important. And these are the things in red are two lines that my mentors have taught me over the last few years that I wanted to share. I always think about these. Better to have a tough audience at home than away from home. So they will give you feedback. It's okay if they're tough. They want to help you. And then know your project inside and out. You don't want to be in a situation where you're asked a question, you're like, well, I only prepared what's on the poster, right? You should know your project inside and out. And that goes for the oral presentation as well. Audience motivation, notice their name tag to get clues, where they're from, are they speaker, moderator, level of training. Why is that important? Because you can tailor your presentation. You don't have to give a same cookie cutter presentation to everyone. Ask them where they're from. It helps you modulate your presentation. Academia versus industry, they'll want to know different things. And trainees like you, right? It's really inspiring to hear trainees talk because, and also because you want to be like them in the future. And that's how you inspire younger learners as well. Why is it important to know your audience and be careful who you talk about? This is from DDW from last year. I gave a poster presentation. Someone the same day um, quoted me, and I showed it to my mom. I was very proud of myself. Someone quoted me and put my name there, Khalid et al., at a guidelines talk the same day. So, even and it was a small project, like 11, 12 patients, it was a case theory, so it wasn't a big deal. But like, don't minimize your impact. Don't minimize your project. You don't know how important your project will be and where it will be talked about. Similarly, in the same way, you don't know if the person who is literally the expert in literature is going to ask you questions about it. So it's a great time for networking. Prepare an elevator pitch. This is the time to shine, right? You worked on this project. I had 11 patient case series, and I literally talked to the person who quoted me at this talk. So 30 seconds, elevator pitch, where you're from, what you're hoping out of the conference, what is the project helping you accomplish, short-term, long-term goals. It's kind of like a job talk almost, except much, much shorter. You don't know if it's going to help you get a fellowship, academic position, industry position. In the future, you can use that for your help. Thank them, right? They spend time. There are thousands of posters they could go to. They came to your poster presentation. And then, nowadays it's becoming fashionable and helpful to have QR codes on posters. So if you have a website or something, you can put a QR code. And if you're more technically savvy than me, you can do that. And then, if you have an X Twitter handle, you can definitely put that there. LinkedIn, if you're old school like me, and business cards, which, if you have a business card, I'm not sure why, but you can definitely share that if you're really, really old school, and that's okay. So key takeaways: preparation before conceiving design of the poster. This is where you should be spending most of your effort. Deadlines are deadlines for a reason, right? To design your poster, accounting for your audience learning styles. And, this is something that I wish I knew early on. Use a friendly color palette. Practice, practice, practice. Yes, I said that 3 times for a reason. Modulate your presentation per needs of your learner. Your learner will thank you. And then be present and ready to network. I think a lot of feedback from conference is, oh, the person who was giving a poster presentation wasn't even there, was late, or, we wish they were there, we could ask questions. You can take pictures later. Just be present. It's that 1 hour where it really, really matters. I guess I'll save questions for the very end after we have our oral presentation talk from Dr. Ayala. But thank you so much for your time. And I can stop
Thank you, Dr.
sharing.
Khalid. Yeah, I think we'll go straight to Dr. Ayala's presentation. People should feel welcome to put questions in the chat as we go, and we'll get to them at the end, or just save your questions for the end. And I have some questions too, of course. All right, next I'll present Dr. Ayala. I'll let her introduce herself and get going.
Okay, let me pull up my presentation. Here we go. Can everyone see that? Does it look okay?
Yes.
Okay. So my name is Divya. I just joined as a transplant hepatologist at Jefferson University over in Philadelphia. I did all of my training at the University of Southern California out in Los Angeles. And so during my training, I gave a few oral presentations. I always get nervous before I give presentations. And so I kind of structured this as if it was like my first one. And what would I like to know to be more prepared? So I entitled it Tips and Tricks for Oral Presentations. And so just to start, I wanted to say congratulations to everyone. It's such a big deal to be able to present at these national meetings, and I'm so excited for you guys. And really, what is the goal with an oral presentation? It's to become part of the scientific community, to share your research, to get feedback on your research, to make it better, and then really to market your research to editors of top journals in the field for publication. And so when you start with a presentation, we always talk about how to construct a slide. And so this is an example. It's actually one of my projects. And this is a slide that I think could use a lot of improvement. It's a lot of text, a lot of numbers. It's hard to really understand what we're talking about here. And I think the color scheme is not very appealing to the eye. So it's really overwhelming for your audience. One of the things you can do instead of using a lot of text, is to present a table. So this is a demographics table from one of my presentations, but it's really quite busy. There's a lot of different categories, and it's hard to really understand what the point of this is, right? So one of the things you can do is really focus on the point of your demographics table that you're trying to make for your very short presentation. So we were really focusing in on liver disease and no liver disease. And here you can really have a chance to really look at the numbers as an audience. And one of the things you can do is really to focus your audience interest is to use boxes as you move through the different categories that you're trying to highlight with animations, which is a little bit more work, but at least it guides the audience's eyes. Another option is to build out your table using animations while you walk them through the actual data. And some people find this less overwhelming. And then finally, and even better, is really to condense your main points and the salient important points into a graphic of some sort. And so this is the same information that was listed in the other 3 slides, but in a graphical form, really highlighting really just the important trends that I wanted to show you guys out of the table. I think this is oftentimes an easier way to ingest information. And as you can tell, it still has all of the same specific information, but you don't necessarily need to cite the exact percentages. And so it makes for a cleaner presentation. So when we talk about building slides, they really should be easy to read and interpret. And you have to divide up busy slides. Large blocks of text are really hard to comprehend, so always using bullet points. And I find animations can be really useful to guide the reader's eye. And graphics are usually better than tables, but tables are better than words. Color schemes are very important. And I usually use sans serif fonts. They tend to play better on the screen. And one of the things I do is really make the title of the slide the main point of the slide, so that we're really directing your audience through your presentation. We allocate about 1 to 2 minutes per slide, depending on what you're trying to cover. I always use the conference template. I find that it's the easiest. Some people will tell you to use your institution's template as well, which is fine. And you should always cite your source material on the bottom corner in small text if you're using other references and other sources. So when you build your talk, you only have about 10 to 15 minutes to go through a lot of your data. You should always start with an introduction. This is very brief because really you should be reserving your talk for your research. And so this should be a maximum of 2 slides. What you really want to get at is the context, briefly introduce why the topic you're researching is important, Where's the gap in the literature that needs to be answered? And then in a separate slide, what is the aim of your project or what is the hypothesis? And clearly specify this for the audience. And then you move on to your methods section. And here you really want to focus on what is your study population? What is the exposure? What are the covariates you adjusted for? Outcomes and how they were defined, and then statistical analysis. And these are all generally separate slides. And then you move on to the results, which is the most exciting part. And really, you dedicate one slide per each part of your results, and you highlight the important and interesting results. So you always start off with the demographics of your study population. Then you move on to the results of your main outcomes. And then if you did any subgroup analyses, this should be included at the end. And then you really wrap up with something called key takeaways. So I like to highlight the big take-home points from your project. And then the next thing is really to highlight future directions. So where do we go from here? What needs to be studied and how? And some of the things, it depends on what your study was. So do we need a phase 2 or phase 3 study, a randomized controlled trial, if this was an observational trial? If it was a retrospective study, do we need to study this prospectively? Do we need to really look at translational things like integration into medical care? Or was this like a 1-year outcome study and we need to see what 5 and 10-year outcomes are? So now that you've made a beautiful PowerPoint, what do you do next? And so really it's about how to give your talk, which can be the most nerve-wracking part of all of this. And so one, you always want to introduce the purpose of your slide. For example, this was a slide that I made for a presentation, and I would start by saying, here we are looking at trends in healthcare affordability by liver disease. Second, you would have to refer to your slide, right? So going back to this slide, after I introduce the topic, I would move on to start orienting the audience to the slide. And so I do it like this. Starting on the left-hand side, we are looking at the outcome of inability to afford one of 6 medical services. On the y-axis is age-adjusted proportion of participants expressed as a percentage, and on the x-axis is the year. Red is the group with liver disease, and gray is the group without liver disease. What we can appreciate here is that liver disease had the highest burden of inability to afford medical services compared to no liver disease. When we move on to the right-hand side, we look at the specific service of affording medications on the right in the same groups. And we see again that adults with liver disease exhibited the highest burden of reporting inability to afford medications during the study period. So that way you've oriented the readers, you walk them through what each of the graphs look like, and then you've really honed in on the take-home point of what your data shows. And then at the end of all of this, you really just have to be concise and complete and present the relevant and essential data because you really don't have that much time. And all of this really comes from a lot of rehearsing. So you got to proofread your talk. You have to practice, practice, practice. I said it too. And the more you've done it, the more polished you appear. And really presenting in front of your PI, your mentors, your friends, your significant others, they're really helpful for picking up typos because you've stared at your own presentation for way too long. They tell you when you have awkward transitions, and they give you feedback on what's not clear, because at the end of the day, your goal is to make a clear, concise presentation. And then you time yourself, and if you go over, you have to cut out or condense slides or find a more concise way to express what you're trying to say. And then you really just think about when you've gone to other talks, what you've enjoyed, and try to incorporate that into yours as well. And so for day of tips, I always tell myself this before I give a presentation. Take a deep breath and speak calmly through your slides. You face the audience, not the screen, and you want to speak loudly and clearly and avoid and like. And remember, everyone comes to a conference to learn, and this time they get to learn from you. And so in terms of questions, I think that this is probably the most feared part of an oral presentation because you're really on that stage and people come up and ask you questions. You want to really think ahead of time about potential critiques or questions and try to generate responses for them. I don't personally do this, but I do know that some people make extra slides for popular questions on the back of their deck. It shows that they're prepared, I guess, they've thought about it, or they had extra data that they couldn't include in their talk and they just put it in the back deck. One of the other things is just to ask for clarification politely if you don't understand the question. And these are some ways that you can do it. There's nothing wrong with that. And then honestly, it's okay to admit that you don't know the answer. And you can say it in a number of ways. Like, that's a great point. We should look at that for the final paper. We hadn't thought about that. I believe you're right. We should look into that. And sometimes, you can make a hypothetical answer about what you would expect based upon what you know, and you can say it that way too. A lot of the times when people ask questions, it's really to make your research project better, and to make it a better piece of science so that it would get published in a higher level journal. And so these are my mentors who really go through all my presentations, and they still review everything to this day. So thank you. Oh, I should stop sharing now.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ayala. That was great. Are there any questions in the chat? If not, I will ask some, and then I have some slides to go through as well with more kind of random tips and tricks, maybe. Speak slowly and clearly. Dr. Khalid, when you're giving a poster presentation and you're there and it's been 10 minutes and nobody's come and like you're starting to feel discouraged, are you grabbing people and saying, come see my poster? Are you giving them 10 seconds to look at it before? What is kind of the strategy, or what approaches have you taken and how has that changed?
Um, I it, it's tough. Usually I have the opposite problem, and I don't think it's anything to do with my project or ideas. I think usually it's too many people, and like who like are you feel like you're talking too long with one person and there are like five people walk past. I think we're very, very lucky in GI and hepatology. Our conferences have like so many invested learners that usually you don't have that problem. That being said, if you do happen to have the problem, maybe you were assigned a corner that no one wants to come to, or there's like food happening at the same time, which does happen at the same time as conferences. I would say just patiently wait. Someone will come. They have to come. And if they don't, it's okay. Your project is still out there. Someone may have looked at your poster earlier in the day. I've seen people randomly, when we keep the posters till the end of the day before we remove. I've seen people like, like randomly at 4:30 p.m., like going there, looking at different posters, reading and making notes, and sometimes even, writing down the contact information. I think that's why the QR code, your email, those things are super important, because maybe someone wasn't there at the time when you were there, but they will contact you afterwards, and that's okay. And again, just really make the best of networking. That's the 1 hour you're assigned. I wouldn't move from my poster. That would be your biggest piece of advice. If you don't move from your poster, someone's going to come. And if they don't come, it's fine. You did your part. You have your poster out there. Someone will contact you. If they don't, you still have like dozens of hours from the conference that you can enjoy, meet and network, go to other posters, meet with people, experts in the field who are presenting on your topic and talk to them. That way you benefit from them. By you presenting, you're hoping other people would benefit, but this way you can kind of flip the script. That 1 hour, you're duty bound, in my opinion, not to move from your poster, because that is the feedback most people get from conferences.
Divya, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, unlike Bilal, I've had the experience of no one coming to my poster. And I tend to look at other people's poster, like my neighbors around me, and I strike up a conversation with them. And I've met a lot of really interesting and wonderful people that way. It's just really a chance for people to collaborate and communicate. And I don't think should be so much pressure on like, this is my time to shine per se.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. All right. Well, I just played with the settings so that people can put questions in the comments if they like. If not, I'm going to run very quickly through some kind of more practical tips and tricks, so you can actualize the great suggestions that Dr. Khalid and Dr. Ayala had. Let's see. Can you see this? All right. So Hi, I'm Alan Hutchison. I'm a transplant pathology fellow at the University of Chicago. This is your title slide. As you'll see, have a template that I use for everything I do. Big font, sans serif, like Dr. Ayala mentioned. Logo of my institution in the corner. A reminder of what this meeting is, both for me and for you, perhaps. And then maybe some other logos as well. My objectives are some quick tips and tricks. Have a slide deck you know and love. I know Dr. Ayala said that she uses the slide deck that the conference offers, which is the appropriate thing to do. Since we're a branch of the AASLD, I have to tell you should do that. But I always use the same slide deck. And sometimes I throw in the logo of the place where I am, because this way I can switch between talks. I can take if I had an ACG talk, I could take it and I could turn it into my ASLD talk without having to redo everything. I took this from Sandeep Nathan. He's actually an interventional cardiologist, but I just stick to it. Down here in the corner, I have my references. In the other corner, either I have more references or maybe I have a logo. You can edit your own slide deck by going to the slide master. So you go PowerPoint, view, master, slide master, and then you can play around here. And then when you're done, there's this close master, which will take you back to the original kind of PowerPoint editing that you know and love. You should iterate as you go. So Dr. Ayala did a very good job of showing what an ideal slide does and does not look like. But when you make your slide deck for the first time, it can be all text. You just have to know that that's not the way it's going to be at the end. And you don't have to make each slide perfect before you go on to the next. This slide will eventually turn into this slide, right? But first, just get your thoughts on the page and then go back and be like, oh, I have way too many words. Let me clean this up now that I've written down what it is I actually want to say. Figure manipulation. So you double click on the figure, you go to picture format, you copy your image, you use crop here, and you use align to get it all the way you want it to be. Touch up your figures. So here I'm showing you on the left a figure that I took right out of a publication. All the fonts are tiny, you really can't tell what the figure label is. So just take it and touch it up. Do it yourself. It's fine, right? And that's much more legible. And now you can get your point across much more easily than with the figure on the left. Use animated boxes to guide, like Dr. Ayala said. So here I've cropped the things where you should go to shape. You can go to shapes and pick a box and then make it take out the fill. You can go to animations and click on appear. Some people like to use other fancy kinds of animations. I just like the classic appear, disappear. Anything else, somebody will get annoyed that you're doing something fancy and then you've lost them for the rest of the presentation. And then if you double click on the animation, you can reorder your animations and always check, because even making this, I messed up the order of the boxes and it totally destroys your flow. Importantly, when you practice, you should know what animations are coming so that you can hit the button as the words are coming out. Saving figures from other programs. So I like to use RStudio to make a lot of my figures. For simple tables, I just use PowerPoint or use Excel. If you're using another program and it's just text, use it as a PDF. Infinitely scalable. You can make it as big as you want on a poster and it'll be fine. Otherwise, I would recommend saving as a bitmap, not as a PDF. The reason why is if you're doing fancy things in R, like I gave a whole presentation using these fancy maps that were all shaded for different types of transplant. And when I ported it into the Microsoft PowerPoint, all that shading went away. And so the day before my presentation, I was all in a tizzy. I had to remake every figure in a bitmap, and then it worked. JPEGs are also okay, but you get scaling issues. So here I'm showing you, if you scale up, the screenshot, eventually you're gonna get some fuzz. Ways to avoid that is enlarge the figure before you take the screenshot of it. But be aware, if you're getting this fuzz, you need to think about a different file format. Run each slide for time. So I'm showing here that when I practiced the slide, it took me 30 seconds. And you should be able to break down your presentation, if not slide by slide, then at least into chunks. So you say, okay, how long did my intro take? It was 5 slides and it took 3 minutes. And my results took 2 minutes and it's a 5-minute presentation. Maybe I need to beef up my results a little bit. That's a lot of introduction. But you should be able to do this, one, because it'll help you know how long your presentation is, and two, so that if you get flustered or lose your train of thought or get something in your eye, then you come to your next slide, you're like, oh, I know where I am because I practiced starting from a dead stop and starting on this slide. Version control. Usually I have at least a dozen files that are all slight variations on a theme. Sometimes it's by day, sometimes it's by when did I send it to what PI. But it's good just to do it. So that way, if you find you made a fatal error in something, you can go back and figure out what it was. If you have a chance, check out your presentation on the big screen. So the tech support people in the speakers room are very helpful and they're your friends, right? Say, hey, I'm in room 103. Is there a time today or tomorrow morning when it's not going to be used and I can sneak in? And they're like, oh yeah, you can go at 12:30, everybody's at lunch. And then you go and you put it on the screen and you say, oh, you know what? Writing sea of colors wash out in yellow on white was not a good idea and does not project well on this projector, if ever. And then you can go and you can make that change and say, okay, clearly I need to get rid of this kind of yellow on white business because it looks great on my high quality Mac, but it doesn't look so good on the kind of weak bulb in the presentation room. The question slide, sometimes people just say questions. Remind them what you were just talking to them about. You just showed them some really cool stuff, and this might trigger them to actually have a question. And remind them of who you are as well. Because I know I've certainly come in late to a presentation. I'm like, this was a great presentation, but who is this person? So remind them, let them know who you are, because you're great. And then have some extra slides. These are just extra slides. All right. Let's stop share. Cool. I still don't see any questions. And I see we've been going for about 45 minutes.
This is great. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm not just saying that. This is really wonderful.
Me too. My posters for AASLD are going to be pretty this year.
The final thing to note, and this is something that actually Sandeep Nathan taught me, is, and this applies to webinars too, is good presentations end on time, great presentations end early. So with that, I'm gonna give everybody back 10 minutes of their night. Thank you very much for tuning in to this Liver Fellows Network. Bye-bye, everybody.